She and her family live in Raleigh, and she is a proud alumna of NC State. She's also an accomplished choral singer, so if you're very nice, she may take some requests at the reception. I'm not sure.
It's not true.
And our guest for this panel is Senator Phil Berger, a man who needs no introduction, but I'll give you all a short one. Senator Berger first started serving in the Senate in 2000 and has led the Senate as President Pro Tem since 2011. He is a graduate of Averett College and the Wake Forest University School of Law, and currently practices law in his native Rockingham County. Under Senator Berger's leadership, North Carolina has experienced, amongst many other things, historic tax and regulatory relief, universal school choice, and has been named the #1 state for business on a number of occasions. So please join me in welcoming Ashley and Senator Phil Berger.
Thank you so much, Ryan. I'm delighted to be here interviewing Senator Berger, and one of the things that Ryan did not mention is that when I was a law student, for those of you in the room, I was an intern, a legal intern for Senator Berger with his general counsel, and so that was a formative experience for me. And so if you're a law student looking for a summer clerkship, I would encourage you to apply to the General Assembly. They are a very tenacious group, smart people working for Senator Berger, and maybe you too could be up here just 5 years into your career interviewing one of the most powerful people in North Carolina. So with that, I want to get started. I have some questions for Senator Berger talking about his career and legislation and how he's worked in the General Assembly, and then also advice for young conservatives in North Carolina. So the first question I have, Senator Berger, for you is what recent legislation are you most proud of and why?
So, whoa, sorry about that. I would say that it's really hard to talk about legislation that we're proud of without talking about education. And in many respects, a lot of the work we've done in education has been work that has taken several years for it to materialize and for it to mature. I would say that the efforts that we've taken to improve literacy in our K-12 system has been one of the most important things that we've done, and the Excellent Public Schools Act, beginning with the version that passed in 2013 and continuing with the more recent version, which basically locked in what's called the science of reading in our K-12, primarily in our elementary school system, has been some of the most important work that we've done. Also in education, one of the things that we've done and we continue to work on is our university system. And North Carolina's Constitution is somewhat unique in that it has a provision. And of course, I've got these justices of the Supreme Court that have the whole Constitution memorized, so I may miss part of this, but basically it requires the state of North Carolina to provide the benefits of a university education to its citizens, and the wording is as free as practicable. And so several things that we've done over the years have tried to advance that goal. One of them is that there's been no tuition increase in any of our public universities for the past 8 years. Now, that's not the result of any single piece of legislation, but it really is the result of a lot of the work that's been done to make sure that North Carolina's fiscal house is in order and the resources are available, and the people are populating the Board of Governors and the trustee boards in our university system. But there is one particular piece of legislation that is critically important as far as trying to achieve that goal that's set out in our Constitution, and it's called the NC Promise Program. It's not a recent piece of legislation, but it's something that, again, has a continuing requirement for funding and a continuing impact. And the biggest part of NC Promise is the creation of NC Promise schools. And so in our university system, there are 4 campuses where tuition at those 4 campuses is $500 per semester, which is pretty much unheard of in modern higher education. And those campuses are Elizabeth City State University, Fayetteville State University, UNC Pembroke, and Western Carolina. So citizens in North Carolina can go to first class university at $500 per semester. So that's something that I think is significant in many respects, not the least of which is it bodes well for the next generation of North Carolinians.
You answered my follow-up to that question, so I'm going to move over to a question about the high-profile litigation involving the General Assembly in recent years. What do you see as the most impactful case to the General Assembly? Can you talk a bit about the case, the background, and the status?
So, one of the interesting things that happens in litigation is the names of cases. And so we've got all sorts of cases out there, and it generally is Berger versus or somebody versus Berger. And that's, in some respects that's good if the outcome is what you wanted, but if the outcome is not something you wanted, it's really a little bit of a challenge to know that law students and lawyers across the state are citing a case that has your name on it, and you didn't do, or at least your side didn't do so well. But the one I would point out is one that we did okay on, and that's Berger versus North Carolina NAACP. That's the case that locked in the right of the legislature to intervene in litigation. Now, we didn't have a problem in state court, but in federal court, a number of the judges in federal court were unwilling to allow the General Assembly to intervene in certain litigation. And invariably, what we were seeing is you had liberal progressive lawyers filing a lawsuit against some entity in the executive branch. At the present time, our executive branch is headed by a liberal progressive governor. And our attorney general is a liberal progressive lawyer. And so when the state gets sued or an agency of the state gets sued, we end up with a lawyer whose boss doesn't agree with what the General Assembly has done. And so you set up a situation where it's entirely possible that somebody's going to settle a case, and the settlement could very well be contrary to the wishes of the General Assembly. So it was our belief all along that the General Assembly should have an absolute right to intervene in those cases to defend the laws that had been passed and enacted into law in the state of North Carolina. Now, that case ended up going all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And of course, as you know, the U.S. Supreme Court isn't totally populated by conservative justices, but in an 8-1, think about that, an 8-1 decision, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the law that we had passed that said we had the right to intervene was something that should be upheld in federal court as well. So I think that is one of the more significant cases, and it is one that enables us to make sure that we're able to present to the court our position and our legal arguments in a way that are unfiltered by lawyers who are probably not philosophically aligned with us, and in some instances the Attorney General actually announces that he is opposed to what we've done.
I'm going to skip ahead a little bit because this brings up another question that I wanted to ask you about related to the North Carolina Constitution and the separation of powers in North Carolina. You bring up a really a great point about one of the things that I learned when I was interning for you was about how really when the North Carolina Constitution was written, we did not have divided government in North Carolina. It was very much a one-party state, and so a lot of things were set up in a way that just didn't contemplate these sorts of tensions that you were just describing. So the question is, given your role as the leader of the North Carolina Senate, and from your perspective, what are some common misconceptions about the balance and separation of powers in the North Carolina Constitution, and how does that differ from the federal system?
So I think one of the interesting things on separation of powers issues is the general public learns a lot about the federal Constitution and about things in the federal Constitution regarding checks and balances, balance of power, all of those kinds of things. And so those concepts are, in some respects, ingrained in many members of the public. Unfortunately, those concepts sometimes are ingrained in a lot of lawyers as well. And as you know, you have to be a lawyer to be a judge in North Carolina. And so the North Carolina Constitution, as I'm sure folks in this room understand, is really completely different than the federal Constitution with respect to those issues. And I will tell you, and he was in the room, I think he's still here, but probably the best initial explanation of the difference is the dissent that then Justice Newby wrote in, here we go again, McCrory versus Berger. That's one that I didn't come out so well in, but Justice Newby wrote a dissent in that, and I would commend everyone to that dissent for what at least in my opinion is a very clear explanation of North Carolina's Constitution and the differences between it and the federal Constitution. In fact, there's one little bit in there that I want to make sure that I quoted accurately. And since Ashley has jumped ahead, my notes.
I apologize for that.
Here we go.
Maybe we have Justice Newby here, maybe.
Yeah, well, he can probably recite it.
He can probably recite it, yeah.
So one of the things that he says is very early in the dissent, that unlike the federal Constitution, the state Constitution is not an express grant of power, but a limitation on power. All power not expressly granted to the federal government or limited by the Constitution, meaning the North Carolina Constitution, resides in the people, and as a legislator, this is the most important part, and is exercised through the General Assembly. And so, again, I would commend that dissent to you. I think it is as clear and concise an explanation of differences between the federal Constitution and the North Carolina Constitution, and clearly a good explanation of the North Carolina Constitution on that particular issue.
So I'll go back to where I was before, number 3. What advice would you have for our state's next governor, whoever that is?
Well, in some respects, the advice would change depending on who it is, but I think generally the advice would be to try to find ways to find common ground with the General Assembly, because the General Assembly's task is to set policy for the state, to enact laws, and to basically be the voice of the people in government. The governor has a responsibility to execute the laws, and so it would seem to me that any governor should try to find common ground with the General Assembly in the context of exercising those powers that the governor has under the Constitution. The second thing I would recommend to any governor is to North Carolina, fast-growing state. Our state government continues to get larger in many respects because of the expanding population, and in some respects because of the additional responsibilities that state government is assuming. But make sure that you appoint competent administrators to manage departments. Even if you've got a governor who has a track record of running a business, of running maybe even some aspect of government, the governor has to have people that are appointed to those positions that can manage those departments, because one person cannot handle all of those things. And so make sure you get competent people.
That's good advice. So you are the longest serving state legislator in North Carolina. What has changed the most about the General Assembly since you were first elected over 20 years ago?
So, you know, first thing that pops into your mind is, well, it's got to be something about technology. You know, the fact that everything is digital now. When I was first elected, we had bill books. Every bill that got introduced was printed, and every member got a printed copy of the bill. Every time you had a bill amended and the amendment got engrossed, you had new copies. And when you would go into session, your legislative assistant will have prepared your bill book for you, which would have copies of all of the bills and the explanations for everything that's on the calendar. We don't do that anymore. But I would say that's not the biggest change that we've seen. And the biggest change really is the philosophical direction that the majorities in the General Assembly are looking to follow at the present time. When I was first elected in 2000, we had big Democratic majorities in the House and the Senate. In fact, I have 50 members, only 15 were Republicans, and you had 35 Democrats. Now, some of those Democrats, philosophically, would probably be Republicans today. And so you've seen over time a real sorting of the two parties into one party that clearly, for folks to get elected in a district that's going to elect a Democrat, is philosophically going to be someone that's more liberal, more progressive than a legislator who gets elected in a district that is going to elect or will elect a Republican who's going to be generally more conservative. And so today, what you see is clear majorities in both houses of the General Assembly that are more conservative, more concerned about tax rates, regulatory climate, outcomes as far as education are concerned, as opposed to, and please take this with a grain of salt because it's coming from somebody that has a political job and takes that political job fairly seriously. The other side that sometimes measures everything, not in terms of outcomes, not in terms of what results you see, but measures everything in how much money you've spent. If you're going to be successful and to get sort of the check mark from the other party, you've got to spend more money. It's as simple as that. And if you listen to a lot of the arguments about what's going on in government, it in many respects boils down to that the Democrats their answer is always going to be you should have spent more money. And that's not the case now as far as the majority.
Right. And that kind of leads to the next question. So I know we see a lot about disagreements that go on between Democrats and Republicans in state government. So what is your philosophy on bipartisanship and working with folks across the aisle? Is there an example of a bipartisan effort you want to share?
So I think sometimes the idea of bipartisanship kind of gets confused with whether or not folks are civil to one another. And so, my idea of bipartisanship is that there are many things where Republicans, Democrats, liberals, conservatives can find common ground. And if that common ground is there, and the legislation or the policy that results from landing on that common ground is something that advances what you feel should be advanced for the state, then we should do that, and we should do it every time. When, as is often the case, although I would say not in a majority of instances, but often the case in the most pronounced issues, we're not going to find common ground. We just have philosophical differences that are very, very difficult to resolve in a way that everybody's going to agree. In those instances, in many respects, bipartisanship is making sure that you've listened to the other side, that you've given, that everyone has had an opportunity to say their piece, so to speak, and that everyone has had an opportunity to present their ideas in a way that they can be considered. Now, the legislative process really does a very good job of that if the legislative process is followed. And so what happens is bills get introduced, generally go to a committee. The real work gets done in the committees, and I dare say that even the Democrats in the Senate will say that in the committees in the Senate, for the most part, now there's some exceptions, there's an exception to just about everything, but for the most part, they have an opportunity to go through the bills, to offer suggestions. Now, their suggestions oftentimes are voted down in the committee if they don't comport with what the majority would want to see happen. And in the Senate, we have had a rule since 2011. It's not a written rule, but it is that we do not call the question. In other words, the rules would allow a motion on the floor to be made to stop debate, call the question, and it only takes a simple majority for that motion to carry. We have never stopped debate except within the confines of the time limits that each individual member has in order to speak. So on first reading of a bill, each member can speak for 30 minutes. And on the final reading, they can speak, they can speak twice, 30 minutes and then 15 minutes on each reading of the bill. On a motion, they can speak for one time for 10 minutes, and we have never cut off debate except when folks got to their time limit. So I think at least in my mind, bipartisanship involves making sure that everyone has an opportunity to speak, because every member of the Senate represents pretty much the same slice population-wise of North Carolina. And so each member is entitled to have their citizens' voice heard.
So I'm going to skip ahead one more time because I know we don't have that much time left, and I really want to get to this question.
It's called a filibuster.
I really want to get to this question because I'm a parent, and I know a lot of us in this room are parents. So all of your children have gone into public service in some way as adults. Can you tell us a little bit about developing a culture of public service in your family?
You know, I wish I could tell you that there was something intentional about that, and I don't know. I think maybe asking them would be the better way. I just know that as all of our kids were growing up, they were involved in school. We were involved with them in school. They got involved in sports. We were involved coaching football, coaching baseball in sports. We were involved in church. I mean, nothing that different from, I would say, just about everybody else in this room. And that they have chosen the path that they wanted to follow. I will tell you, it didn't surprise me that Philip Jr. wanted to be a lawyer. Kevin was a different thing. I was astonished that he wanted to be a lawyer. And then I was really surprised when he decided to run for county commission. And quite frankly, again, I'm not objective about this, but he's probably the best politician in the family, in my opinion. But I think you've got to ask them what drove them to do that. I don't know that I have the answer to that.
They probably had an example, pretty good example growing up. And so I'll wrap on this question. What advice would you give young conservative lawyers and law students hoping to make an impact in our state?
Get involved. There are all sorts of opportunities out there to get involved, whether it's volunteering at the local level with a civic organization of some sort, whether it's sort of the path that, at least part of what I did, there was a need for someone to fill a slot on the local board of elections. And someone asked if I was interested in doing that. That was really the first involvement that I had in politics. But just get involved, whether it's volunteer work or whether it's doing something that directly impacts government.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for your time, for being with us today. We all really appreciate it. And we don't have a Q&A as a part of this, but I'm sure you could hang out for a few more minutes. We do need to go ahead and set up, so we'll take a quick break while we set up for the next panel. And thank you so much. And please help me in thanking Senator Berger.
Let me say something for you, if you don't mind.
Sure.
What I'd like to say is that I have been so fortunate in the folks that have been willing to come to work in our office at the General Assembly. And I don't know where Brian is, but Brian Fork is now my chief of staff. He was my counsel. And Josh Yost, I think, is here. Madison is here, and I don't know if Brent is here, but we have just been so fortunate, and the people of North Carolina have been so fortunate that really talented lawyers have been willing to come work in our office. And I can tell you every one of them could be making a whole lot more money in the private sector or even in other branches of government than we're able to pay them. And to the extent that I get credit for anything, I will just tell you that the staff that has been willing to work in the Senate deserves the lion's share of any credit that's out there.
Oh, we really appreciate that. Well, thank you. Help me thank Senator Berger and also his staff. Thank you so much for being here today.